The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. The content of the following program, including all statements from the hosts and guests, is to provide general information and commentary about the law. Under no circumstances does any statement made by the host or guest to a caller or listener constitute legal advice or the formation of an attorney-client relationship, and the material from this program shall not be viewed as substitute for a personal consultation with an attorney. Now, prepare yourself to be informed and entertained by Gus Bravo and Neil Kotze, two AV-rated trial lawyers who have been practicing law for a combined total of nearly 40 years. For the next 30 minutes, they will share their insight and commentary on important legal issues affecting all of us.
Bob Peterson is on trial for bank robbery. And as he's sitting in the courtroom, the arresting officer takes the stand and points directly at Bob Peterson and says, "That's the man I arrested for bank robbery." And during his direct exam, he also reveals that he arrested Bob Peterson because another officer who was at the crime, pointed out Bob Peterson. Now the lawyer defending Bob gets up on cross-examination and says, "So you actually didn't see Mr. Peterson rob the bank?" The officer says, "No." "How did you identify him again?" "Another officer told me what he looked like." "And you trusted that other officer?" "Of course I did," says the officer. "Now wait a second. Do you have lockers at the police department?" "Yes, we do." "Do you have locks on your lockers at the police department?" "Of course we do." "Well, if you trust your fellow officers so much, why do you keep your valuables locked in your lockers?" And the police officer paused and he says, "Well, sir, the police department is actually connected to the courthouse, and every now and then we have lawyers walk through there." Hi, I'm Neil Kotze. This is Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil.
And I'm Gus Bravo. Took a long time to get to that punchline, I felt.
Right.
But that was good. I liked it.
You didn't see it coming, though.
No, of course not. Of course not. Of course
You're like,
not.
why? Where's the lawyer joke in here?
Well, look, we're obviously in different format here today.
Yep.
Again, because one of the two of us decides to take another workation.
Yeah, so we're pre-recording, so this is Tuesday, whatever day Tuesday is, the 4th.
August 4th.
August 4th.
August 4th, the day after what we thought was going to be the Republican presidential debate. So for those of you keeping score, we're probably now batting like 0 for 10 on predictions. Our previous show, we were talking about the GOP debate coming up that evening.
Right.
Obviously, I think it's
still not going to be for another couple of days. So when you're listening to this show, it will have occurred, and then maybe the August 17th show, we might talk about it.
Right. But you know, we were talking about, obviously, the lawyers and the role in politics. And it occurred to us that last week, law students actually took, at least in Florida, and I think it might be nationwide, I think they all pretty much take the bar exam. They take
it around the same time because of the multi-state exam.
Right, so they took the bar exam in the state of Florida, and I think pretty much nationwide was last week. And it got us a little bit nostalgic about thinking of the days that we took it. Well, you took 3 separate bar exams.
Yeah, I have to clarify, in 3 different states, because every time I say I took the bar exam 3 times, people look at me like I'm a Kennedy.
From the first state, he went to the second. No, I'm just kidding.
So
you took, obviously, your experience, and we can talk a little bit about our experience taking the bar exam, and for those folks that are listening, what the bar exam is compared to law school. And I think I have a picture that will hopefully be able to play later because we're kind of pre-recording this, so it's hard to see the images. But I have a picture of the movie The Paper Chase.
Oh, what a great
Which
movie.
I think is probably one of the best law school movies, probably if not the best law school movie around. And it's a picture of, and I forget what the lead character, the law student.
Ford.
Ford?
I think it's Ford.
Okay, the one with the disheveled hair.
Yeah.
And the mustache. You know, when I saw that setting, that kind of, I thought maybe that was around the time you were in law school. No? A decade earlier?
It might have been a little before. I mean, I remember seeing that before going to law school.
You didn't wear bell-bottom pants in law school?
You see, Mr. Fashion here in bell-bottom pants.
Oh, I'm sure you were fashionable.
Oh,
So there's a picture of Ford standing up first day of class. I believe it's torts. And what's the professor's name is... Come on, Neil.
Kingston, oh.
You're going to remember that later on.
Oh, that's going to drive me crazy.
Completely throw him off the show. So he's asking you know, he's picking on a volunteer, and it's a picture of Ford just standing up in front of the whole class and just being tortured. And so, which is an example of the Socratic method. I think is it Kingsfield?
Kingsfield. I know, yeah, King something.
You're
Kingsfield.
welcome.
No, I remember the joke when I was in law school was whenever I was called on, somebody would whisper to somebody else, "Okay, we're going to find out what Legal Lines has to say about this case now," which was the equivalent. Legal Lines is the equivalent of Cliff's Notes.
So it's law school.
It's law school
for dummies.
Law school for dummies. Cliff's Notes. It's the summaries of what because you've got a lot of work to do.
You know, it's funny because I went to the University of Florida, and the law school is on the outskirts of campus. Right across the street from the University of Florida, they had this little sort of like equivalent of a 7-Eleven. Right? I forget what the name of. That's going to bother me. The name of this little quick mart. You can pick up beer and cigarettes and chips, but you can also buy law school books there.
Interesting.
Wilbert's. Thank you. Thank you for helping me out with that one. And so the funny thing about it was the law school professors had some kind of arrangement with Wilbert because they would only order their books through him. So you couldn't go
you bought
anywhere.
new books at Wilbert?
New books.
Oh, I was thinking the students were selling their used books.
No.
Very interesting.
So it was quite a racket they had. But he also had all those help aids and the study aids, and I had the index cards and the Emmanuel's. Remember that?
Emmanuel's, Gilbert's, Legal Lines. I can't remember. I can't remember the name of a case. Hadley versus Baxendale.
Yes.
See, I can remember a case.
Yes, very good.
Penoyer v. Neff. I can remember that.
Right.
Okay, anyway.
That's enough.
Yeah,
So you know that reminded me of my experience for law school. But my perception of law school before I started reading about it, what it was going to be like, I thought it was going to be more like the bar exam. See, the bar exam, as you recall, the 3 times that you've taken it, and passed each time,
right,
I may add.
Right.
It's really about the law. And you just memorize and learn, and you know more law that morning, right, than you probably ever will in your career. Whereas law school, it's about the Socratic method. And that's why the paper chase is such a good example of that.
Yeah. Law school is much more analytical. Now, the bar exam has its level of analysis because there's an essay and then a multiple choice, as we like to refer to it, multiple guess.
Multiple guess.
Because
yes.
it's harder taking the bar exam. The last bar exam I took when I was in Florida, I think I'd been practicing at that point 15 years. And you develop an analytical thought process. Taking a multiple choice exam is very difficult as a 15-year practicing attorney because I can argue any one of those 4 answers is right. And I could convince a judge that any one of those 4 answers is right. So picking one that's actually right is very difficult. That does not help when you're trying to do multiple choice. It's funny
you mentioned that because it's a very idealistic way of practicing law. What you should do in perfect world, but the reality is the practice tells you I can just pick up the phone, solve the problem with the other side, and so yeah, I can see that getting a little bit problematic. But again, to me, I remember for law school we took, you know, it's always at Tampa Convention Center, 2 days. The first day was the Florida version, and then the state side, and then the second day was the multi-state. And so the first day, the morning of, were the essays that you mentioned, and so they give you, I think, 3 essays or 2 essays, I forget what it was. And then you have the multiple guess afterwards. But the Florida version, to me, was the harder one because the multi-state, it's multiple guess, but it's fair. Florida, I just thought, tried to intentionally trip you up.
Yes, the Florida multiple choice was ridiculous.
Now, how did that compare with North Carolina and Georgia?
Georgia was the first bar I took, and I probably the most nervous because I've never been able to pass a bar in my life. Dun-dun-dun.
Yes.
But the Georgia was actually one of the easier ones. Georgia was, I'm going to get this back. I think Georgia was the one that had 12. How many essays in Florida? Do you remember?
I believe that it is an even number.
Wow. 6?
Yeah.
I
thought it was 4.
I think North Carolina was 6. I think Georgia was the one that had 12 essays, and they were really, really short. I mean, you had to do 12 essays in 6 hours, so you only had a half hour per essay.
That was the entire state
version?
Well,
that's the state version. There's no multiple choice in Georgia or North Carolina. They saved that for the multi-state. And North Carolina, I think, was 6 essays in 6 hours, so they were a little bit more detailed. Now, the problem with Georgia is 12 essays means 12 different areas of the law because you're not tested. What happens is the bar examiners in each state will give you the 30 potential topics they can test you on, forcing you to learn all 30 areas of the law that they find important. But they're only going to test you on those that they weave into an essay. Now sometimes an essay will overlap. But
the essays are more issue spotting. They're more equivalent to what law school is like. Whereas the multiple choice, multiple guess, it's more of the what.
Yeah, no judge is going to come to you and say, okay, here are 4 choices. Which one is right?
Tell me which objection.
Right.
You
or a client is going to come into you. Well, I don't know. Now that these clients study the Google School of Law, they may come to you with 3 or 4 options and ask you which one is right.
They come in with good guesses, but the essay was again issue spotting, and for those that are not familiar with that, it's the whole genesis of the Socratic method. It's asking questions more than just giving answers, because and I know clients get frustrated with us because a lot of times we raise more questions in our initial meetings than we actually give answers. But because, usually a set of facts, we can go so many different ways.
You have to, as one lawyer once said to me, it's peeling back the onion. You have to peel back to get the layers until you can figure out the core.
and every essay starts with 2 words, right? If you're off to a good answer, which is, it depends. Right, and that's when you're on the right track, because there's so many variables that could affect your answer, and so the essay portions are more. They give you to give people an example. They'll give you a fact pattern of somebody bought a car and then they went to refinance it and they got into a promissory note. But then as they're driving to the car dealer to get the car, they get into a car accident, and it sounds like this horrible set of facts. But the irony is, when you've been practicing long enough, you get those kind of facts.
You start to realize, those bar exam questions.
Every now and then I'll joke with clients. I'm like, this sounds like a bar exam. So that we could obviously go down that path, but I don't know if you had. So you took Georgia first.
Georgia in 1991.
Okay, hold on. Stop right there. 91. I was going to junior prom in 1991. But go ahead. Tell us about the first time.
Oh, the agony. Georgia 1991, North Carolina 1996, and Florida 2005.
Now, in between, there was one. I've only heard the story once, and I thought it was funny. So I'm hoping that the second time I hear it, it's funnier. And it doesn't go back. But there was a funny story about, I think, the way you learned about
Georgia, the first bar. It just so happened. Now, in 1991, this is now all these law students, they take the bar and they can find out online whether they passed. That didn't exist in 1991. In 1991, you heard through the grapevine that they'd been put in the mail. And not FedEx. I mean, sometimes mail for some people takes 2 days, takes 5, whatever. But the rumor was out there in the mail. One of my buddies went home for lunch to check his mail. I was working. There was no way I could break free for lunch, and I lived 30 minutes away from the office. So he called me from his house because we didn't have cell phones.
Wow.
My results are in. My results are in. I'm like, darn, I can't. And I'm traveling to D.C. that night, so I could not get to my mailbox. This was before Claris had moved down to Georgia. So I was living by myself. I could not get to my mailbox. I give my mailbox key to one of the secretaries, and I say, I'm going to call you. Please, I don't care what the answer is. If it's bad news, good news, give me the results. So I give her the mailbox key. She happens to live in the same complex. I go to D.C. That night. I land, and I decide this is going to be cool. I'm kind of a sap in some ways. So I take a cab to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I happen to know, because I've been there before, there's a telephone booth right across from the U.S. Supreme Court.
I bet you there's no telephone booth
No,
today.
there's not. But in 1991, there was a telephone booth right there, and I said, I'm going to get my bar exam results.
Was it one of those booths that you can actually close the door?
No, it was one of those open ones.
Okay.
But I'm going to get my bar exam results standing and staring at the U.S. Supreme Court.
So I call your daughter is here in the room. I'm sure she's probably like about the gag.
Yeah, I did mention my daughter's here at the show. She's in the corner. Maybe we'll have her come in the second half.
Dad, you're so cheesy. But go ahead.
I pick up the phone. I call her. Again, no cell phone, so she had to be home. We had a set time she was going to be home. And I call her, and I say, Linda. And all I hear is, Neil, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, oh, my God. She left the mailbox key at the office. But the Neil, I'm so sorry, did not resonate well.
Is that when you turned your back to the Supreme Court building?
So I ended up having to wait another day to get these results because she couldn't get back to the apartment complex. I finally got them standing in front of Congress instead of the Supreme Court, but nonetheless,
which is very apropos.
I did pass.
Well, good. Congratulations. Well, you know, my experience is a little different, and I think we have enough time before we go to break. I'll be quick about this one. This was back in the day. This was in early, I think it was 2002, actually, when I got my bar results. April Fool's Day, actually, is when the bar results came out. I think the Supreme Court had a sense of humor. They decided to post them on April Fool's Day, and so they posted them on a web page. So by the time I graduated, we had the internets, but it was one of these pages where they just threw all the information on there. It looked like a giant, enormous Excel spreadsheet. And as you know, they don't put it by name. They give you an ID number, a unique ID number for your test. And so then they have various columns: the state, federal, and then whether you pass also the ethics and whether you've passed the background check. And so it's literally a yes or no if you met that requirement. And so I had to take a ruler and go across the screen when I found my name. And of course, the guy or gal above me and below me both failed. So I'm going across making sure I have every line, you know, to pass, because I was at the time with Carlton Fields getting ready to go out to lunch with my assigned mentor, who was no doubt going to ask me about the.
Did you pass?
So fortunately I passed, and here I am today. God help us all.
I remember actually the same thing, because I took the Florida bar in 2005. It was the same thing as you.
Right.
And the problem was, you know, my vision was, I was older, my vision was not as good. And the person above me failed, and the person below me failed. Yeah. So I'm like, wait, is this me?
And you're making sure.
I'm making sure that I am the one in between those two that actually passed.
I'm sure now there's some app, and it's easy.
You did ask me an interesting question about which bar was tougher. I will say, because you mentioned the background check in Florida, the background check in Florida was by far tougher than anything in Georgia or North Carolina. I mean, it was sickly ridiculous. I remember having to answer, one of the questions was, list all prescription medication you've taken since the age of 16. Now, you were a recent law school graduate, maybe I had to go back. You know how far that was at that point from here?
Well, Neil, I'm sure no one's listening. Were you honest about everything?
Of course, prescription medication.
Hold that thought, and when we come back from the break, I want you to give me an itemized list of everything that you reveal. We're going to go through those background questions.
All right, I plead the fifth.
Well, you're listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus O'Neill.
Attorney Confidential with Gus O'Neill is being brought to you by the law offices of Neil D. Codsing and Bravo Law. Bravo Law is a business litigation firm known for providing common sense solutions to small businesses and individuals throughout South Florida. Mr. Bravo is rated AV by Martindale-Hubbell and Superb by AVVO, the highest ratings available from these two entities. The law offices of Neil D. Codsey is a litigation boutique with offices in Broward and Miami-Dade counties. Mr. Codsey is a veteran trial lawyer with nearly 25 years of jury trial experience. He is also a two-time recipient of the South Florida Daily Business Review's Most Effective Lawyer Award, a recipient of numerous awards for providing pro bono legal services, and has been recognized by the National Law Council. Call our office, 786-464-0841 or 954-790-6711, and get informed. You're listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. If you have a comment, question, or just want to contribute to the conversation, call the show at 888-565-1470 and share your thoughts on what's going on. Now, back to Gus and Neil for more Attorney Confidential.
We're back, and I'm going to introduce my daughter, Samantha. For those of you watching, you can see her on camera. For not, you can say hi.
Hi.
Okay. She decided to come in this morning. It's summer break and isn't in camp right now. So how's Daddy doing?
Terrible. Yes, that face says it all. See? Perfect.
Okay, now you can leave. And no allowance next week.
I think she's upset because, you know, Neil, not to bring up old memories, but in our second show, one of us took the time to draw a nice little note to his daughter saying, "Hi, honey, I love you."
Hi, Samantha.
But I planned it ahead of time. Right. It's the thought that counts, and you know that.
When's the last time Daddy planned something ahead of time?
Never. She's rolling her eyes.
Roll her eyes, exactly.
Well, we've been talking about, obviously, our law school experience in general, but particularly with the bar exam. We got a little nostalgic, I think, because the bar exams were last week. And I tell my wife this. I said, look, whatever we do, we're not moving. I don't want to have to take that exam again anywhere.
Yeah.
Unless it's like Hawaii or something.
The third
because
one was
just,
really tough for me. Now it would be.
And you're right. I think experience works against you.
It absolutely works against you because they want you to answer the multiple choice, especially. Now, essay, I think it works for you.
Yes.
I think essay, it helps you. If you know the law, you can think clearly. You've got
you can spot the main issues.
Multiple choice as a 20-year practicing lawyer is very difficult.
You know, it's interesting that it used to be an apprenticeship. Right. I mean, it wasn't a state exam. You'd graduate from law school and you go work with another lawyer.
And there are some states that still do that.
Which I think
we might have actually discussed that on one of our shows early on. There's some states that you can go to law school, an unaccredited law school, or go to only 2 years and do a 1 or 2 year apprenticeship and still sit for the bar exam.
Right. I think it's a great idea because, again, in law school they teach you how to think like a lawyer, which you deal with Haley v. Baxendale, which is, I think, is an old, I mean, it's probably 1700th or 1600th.
The only one I remember that is because it was a contract dispute in which the gentleman trying to get out of the contract in Georgia claimed that he was high as a Georgia pine, which is one of the famous quotes from that opinion.
There was the other one. What was the one where the person had, the kid had like some kind of bone disease and the other kid kicked him under the table and like fractured his leg? Because, you know, you take your plaintiff as you find them.
That's the eggshell plaintiff.
Yes, the eggshell plaintiff. Yeah. So you should remember these cases, but these cases were, a lot of them are from England. And so, obviously, they're not good laws. So, but law school, they teach you how to dissect those cases and how to spot issues. The bar exam, then obviously you have to do a brain dump of all the law you try to memorize. But then comes the next part, which is learning to practice law. Which obviously some would argue, well, we still do. I mean, every day you and I, we learn something new about the practice of law. And we always repeat that same adage, it's a practice of law. It's called the practice of law for a reason. Because we've had, you always learn by the negative experiences more than you do by the positive ones.
Law is not typically black or white. I mean, there are certain elements that are. Criminal law has elements that are black and white. If you drive a mile an hour over the speed limit, you're breaking the law.
Right.
But in civil law, there's a lot of gray.
Right. And so, look, I think this apprenticeship concept, I would be for it. And I know we've talked about maybe bringing in some younger attorneys.
Isn't that what you're doing with me, though? Kind of like an apprentice?
Yes, I'm your teacher, and you're still the immature student, as proof of the pudding is in the eating, right here.
Right.
But look, I think now states are moving into, for instance, California used to be a 3-day exam. Now it's shortened to 2. And I think there is kind of a movement to do more of an apprenticeship. The practice of law in general has to adapt because we see all these other collateral businesses popping up that are providing legal services, not legal advice, but legal services. So there are a lot of things that we have to adapt to the 21st century.
And there's a movement actually in Florida to relax the standards. It's receiving a lot of negativity from practicing attorneys for a couple of reasons. I mean, you don't want the market to get flooded, and Florida has 2 things going for it which would flood it potentially with attorneys. One, we have no state income tax. And any chance a lawyer gets to save money, a lawyer's going to take advantage of it. 2 is a lot of people come down here to retire. So if you let lawyers who've been practicing and then they get into their 70s and they really should be retiring from the practice come down here, they don't know Florida law, and they start to practice later in life, you're going to have some issues there.
Be careful what number you use.
Right. I remember 70s.
You're going with 70.
I remember 70. Maybe that's young these days. But
you don't want to offend. There's some folks I think you've practiced with.
Well, they're great lawyers, but if you have never practiced in Florida and you try to come down here in the twilight of your career, I think that is an issue with respect. Florida does have some different laws depending on what state you're coming from.
Yeah, and again, practice.
I mean, in Florida, they don't allow you to do the things with farm animals they do in North Carolina. So it's it's a different state.
Is that why you guys moved?
Yeah, exactly. We got caught.
And so, there's
the old joke is that in North Carolina, one of the difference between North Carolina and Florida, in Florida, they say, this bud's for you. In North Carolina, they say, this U's for bud.
I've heard that one before. Not from you.
Yeah, right.
Not from you, fortunately. So look, again, the practice, to me, I remember my first day. I'll never forget my first day actually as a practicing attorney. I arrive at the office. Oh, actually, this is before I had my license. So technically, I wasn't yet licensed to practice. But I show up at the firm, and Carlton Fields, and it's a nice downtown office, and they give you your office overlooking in the water, and then they say, "Here's your secretary," and they say, "Go have fun." And I'm thinking, what am I supposed to do? And so I realized I knew nothing, and frankly, it's taken me a while to get there. So, look, I think we can talk about this obviously forever, but we've been given our 2-minute warning. So I'm going to give you a minute and a half of the takeaway.
Well, I will say that for most lawyers, the experience is not walk in the door and say, "Here's your secretary, go have fun." Because that just leaves a completely different connotation.
I didn't even think about that. Shame on you.
But anyway, I think that it's important to understand that the practice of law comes from a excruciating 3 years in law school and then an exam that lawyers take, and in some ways has very little to do with what they learned in law school.
The real lessons come afterwards.
Lessons come afterwards. So with that, I know we're running short on time. I'll pass the baton back.
Congratulations to the kids who just took it, and good luck.
Hopefully
and best
all
of luck,
of you passed.
Your learning lesson is going to start now. So we have a picture that should be coming up. Of course, I have it here on my phone. So for those of you following intently online, and this is the quote of the day, and of course I just lost it. But it says, "Before you assume, learn the facts. Before you judge, understand why. Before you hurt someone, feel." And Neil, this is very apropos to you. Before you speak, think.
Always.
And that's our quote of the day.
It's better to keep your mouth shut and remain thoughtful than to open it and remove all doubt.
You said that one already. You hijacked my quote. It's Lincoln. I know. We've heard it. Anyways, tune again next week with Attorney Confidential. I don't know which camera to look at, but we're going to see Neil's face the whole time.
All right.
Sorry.
You have been listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus Bravo and Neil Kotze, 2 rated AV trial attorneys with over 40 years of experience. Tune in next week for another episode of entertainment, insight, and just plain fun. That's Monday, 6 p.m. on WNN 1470 AM. See you next Monday for more Attorney Confidential. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored